Welcome friends to finite element methods for fluid dynamics. We begin this course by first looking at what exactly is computational fluid dynamics and what is high performance computing. So, I just want to give you a small preview of what these two terms are, and then we are going to discuss what will be covered in this course. So, as you are aware, this is a picture of our central library, and this actually came out as a postal stamp on IIT Kanpur finishing its 50 years. So, first let us begin with what is computational fluid dynamics. As the name suggests, there are two components in it, the computing part and the fluid dynamics. Okay. So, essentially we look at models of flow. Okay. These could be equations like the Navier-Stokes equations, and because they are extremely complex, we use computational methods to seek solutions to them. And what I wanted to show here in this slide is some applications, that what is the level of maturity that CFD has reached today, so that we can actually apply this to many settings in our daily life. So, the first picture that you see here on the left, the top left, that is a picture of two cyclists, one behind the other, and this is a CFD simulation. So, suppose you are training for the Olympics and you are interested in asking a question that for the bulk of the race, should you be leading the pack or should you be trailing behind someone to conserve your energy? More explicitly, which of the two cyclists, the upstream one or the downstream one, is spending more energy for the same speed? Okay, as you realize, the downstream guy is in the wake of the upstream cyclist. So, CFD can actually help you answer that. It can also tell you what should be the posture of the cyclist to incur minimum energy loss. It can also tell you what is the optimal spacing between the two cyclists. Okay. It can also tell you about the design of the bicycles for minimal energy loss and so on. In fact, if you look at the headgear, these helmets are aerodynamically designed so that they incur as little drag as possible. So, depending on the posture of the cyclists, okay, these headgears can be designed appropriately. The second picture here is the Formula 1 racing car. As you are aware that these cars, they move at extremely high speed, and in fact when they make a turn, okay, the tires may not generate enough friction in the normal course of design, and therefore the car may skid. So, usually what is done is a wing, an inverted wing is affixed to the car at the rear, and this, unlike an airplane has a wing which produces upward lift to counteract the weight. This wing actually produces a lift in the downward direction. So, that therefore the reaction from the ground increases, and because the friction is, the force of friction is proportional to the coefficient of friction as well as the normal reaction from the tires. So, because we are producing downward lift, so that adds to the weight and the car produces more friction, and thereby you can have a very safe turn. So, CFD can help you design various components of this Formula 1 racing car. For example, what is the flow through these air intakes? Is that sufficient to run the engine? What about the cooling of the engine? What about the drag on the spinning tires? Is that optimal? What about the person who is driving the car, the pilot? What about his drag? Is that position optimal compared to the intake of the engine? So, there are several questions that CFD can help you answer, and they would be actually less expensive to get compared to wind tunnel tests or actual experiments in the field. Here another picture of the streamlines or the streak lines, or for that matter path lines if you would like, whichever you want, for a similar flow on a racing car. This one is also quite interesting. This is a swimmer who is trying to find out whether the strokes are optimal. So, suppose I have a swimming coach and he would like to find out if I am doing my strokes correctly. So, he can give me a set of exercises and then I can get inside the pool. I can have a team of people who will take my images, actually animated images, and then I could run a fluid dynamic model on it. Okay. So, now that I have my strokes, the imaging of that, I can actually run a fluid dynamic simulation and see what is the disturbance that I am causing to the water. And look at the details. For example, the swimmer, the fingers are completely closed. So, one can actually find out what are the saddle points, what are the separation points as the flow goes past the forearm, what about the flow through the fingers, the web of the arm, and so on. So, you can use CFD even to perfect your swimming and improve your performance. It can therefore be used to design gear, for example swimwear or headgear to reduce drag. Okay. This is a picture of an airplane, a hyperplane. So, there is this question of the air intake which is at the belly of the aircraft, and this has a ramjet engine, in fact a scramjet engine inside it, and one would like to see if the performance is optimal. So, you could use CFD to do simulations and get data where it may not be possible to do experiments. Okay. These experiments would require setting up a huge shock tube or a shock tunnel, and it may not be very conducive to do the right kind of experiments, but CFD can actually give you data. Here is again a picture of a soccer ball. So, as you are aware, the soccer ball goes through a change in design every few years. So, Adidas has the contract for the design and upkeep of the soccer balls, and each year they do a lot of research. So, the number of panels on the soccer ball decide, for example, the lateral movement that a ball may go through, and CFD can help you actually go through this design, what should be the groove size and so on and so forth. So, how is all this modeled? So, the backbone of all this is a model, okay? And in this picture I have shown you the incompressible flow equations. So, one can assume that let the flow be modeled by certain balance laws, and what we have shown here is the mass balance, which is simply the divergence free condition on the velocity field, because it is an incompressible flow. The equations would look a little bit more complex if it is a compressible flows. And then you had the force balance or the momentum equation, wherein you have the acceleration term, then the body force, and then these are the surface forces, the divergence of that. And if you assume there is a Newtonian fluid, that is the pressure part, then the viscous stress tensor, which is related to actually the strain rate, and then boundary conditions and initial conditions. So, the challenge here in CFD would be A, to get the right kind of flow model, okay. B, to model the correct geometry. So, we saw examples of let us say the airplane or the F1 formula motor car, or maybe the soccer ball. So, how do you model that geometry, because that is where these boundary conditions would be applied, and then actually then solving these equations for that specific problem. And then that is not going to be easy, because you can see these equations are unsteady, there is a time dependent term here, they are nonlinear, there is this term which is the convection term which is nonlinear, and these are coupled. Okay. So, you cannot just solve continuity equation independent of the momentum equation. So, these are really very complicated equations, and it is not possible to solve them theoretically and to get an answer using a pen and paper. That can be done for extremely simple problems. So, more often than not, you would have to use some computational methods, and in this course we are going to look at one of the methods to solve these equations, and that is the finite element method. Of course, we will look at the details. There are many methods to solve these equations. You could use, for example, the finite difference method, the finite volume method, and then one could ask, why finite elements, or why not finite volumes, or why not finite difference, or spectral method. So, we will when we get into the details, we will try to see how all these methods are related and which one would give you what. So, each method has its own advantages and its own limitations, and we will try to look at those. Now, the second aspect of CFD, which is the computation part, which requires a hardware. So, it is kind of nice to look at the history of or the evolution of computing. So, as many of you may be aware, the unit of computing is called floating point operation. So, if I add two floating point numbers a plus b, that is one flop, one floating point operation. If I add three numbers, then that would be two additions, and that would be two flops. So, one of the measures to look at the speed of a computer is the number of flops, floating point operations per second. So, that is flops. Okay. So, the earliest computers that we are aware of, this is an IBM in 1954, which actually would give you 67 kilo operations per second. So, you can see with the size of this computer, it occupies a big hall, it has all kinds of gadgetry, way ahead of its time in those days. Very few people would get to compute on it, but you can see it only gives you something like 67 kilo operations. Then you move to the control data, and that would give you something like 3 megaflops. Okay, that was really state of the art at that point in time. Then you have the Cray series of computers. So, this is Cray 1 in 1976, which would give you something like 250 megaflops. So, you can see from kiloflops we move to megaflops, and now we are moving to something like a gigaflop, which would mean we are looking at 10 to the 9th floating point operations per second. As you are aware, your laptop would actually give you more computing power than a gigaflop these days. Okay. So, the supercomputer, as they are called, is also a very time dependent term, it is a very unsteady term. A computer which is state of the art today would be a supercomputer, but then 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you would find much faster computers, much bigger computers. So, one has to move on and one can solve bigger problems. This was the era of vector computers, wherein you would have a pipeline of numbers and you would operate them one after the other very quickly. So, there would be, instead of scalar registers, there would be vector registers. But then people realized that actually we can do distributed computing. Okay, what that means is that instead of engaging one computer to solve your problem, you can actually engage many computers. But then there is this problem of algorithms, the communication. You know, the example I would like to give is that suppose I request each student in the class to add 1000 numbers each. Okay, so that would be a sequential operation where I give you one number, then you ask for another one, you compute the sum of the two, then you ask for the third number, then you add it to the previous two, then you ask for the fourth number. So, like that you would go through almost 999 cycles or that many additions to compute the sum of 1000 numbers. But we could do something different. So, suppose I have at my disposal 20 students who could add all of these 1000 numbers. And what I could do is I could distribute these 1000 numbers amongst 20 students. So, the first one, for example, would get 1000 by 20, the second one would get the next set of numbers. So, every student has something like 50 numbers. right? And now they are adding 50 numbers each, but in parallel. So at the end of the cycle, assuming that they add at the same speed, I would have 20 sums available with them. So each student has 20 values which now need to be added. Okay. So again I have several ways of doing that. One simple way could be, I would say, well, all of you give those values back to me, and then when I receive them I can add them up and the matter is closed. But I could have another level of parallelism, and I could say, all right, you please pass the values to the guy on the right to you. Okay. So when that happens, in the next cycle 10 students are sitting idle and 10 of them are adding 2 numbers each, but I have achieved some parallelism. And then in the next cycle I could say, hey, now I will engage only 5 of you and you pass the value to the person on the right of you. Okay. Not everybody, every alternate one. So there would be some overhead in the sense that there is a communication involved. Also, not everything is in parallel, because I have lost some parallelism. Not everybody is engaged in the activity at all times. Okay. So I can design special algorithms, and then I can use computers with nice architecture to actually break down my problems into smaller problems and solve them. So that was the advent of distributed computing. So there were many computers at one point in time, many companies which tried their luck. So the one shown here is the connection machine from the Thinking Machine Corporation. So this is a CM5 installation way back in 1993, which would give you all of 60 gigaflops. Okay. And then we come to the teraflop level. Okay. This, for example, is in 2002, the Earth simulator in Japan, which gave 36 teraflops. So right now in India we have several installations which have several teraflops of computing power. But then we want to go to petaflops, we want to go to exaflops and so on. So as you can see, this installation is the Cray Jaguar way back in 2009, almost more than a decade ago, and the rated power is about 1.8 petaflops. Okay. Of course, this is also history, we have much bigger computer. So the joy of computing is, A, you get more power, and by using more power you can solve bigger problems, you can have more accurate solutions. So it is almost like a telescope. Okay. If I have a telescope and I want to do astronomy, then the more powerful telescope you give me, the better is my resolution and the more are the structures that I can see in the sky. Okay. Same thing with a computer. If you give me a tiny computer and I want to solve Navier-Stokes, I may not be able to do a very good resolution study. So you must have heard about the weather forecasts. They are all forecast using weather models which run on a computer. So I know the weather now and I want to understand what would be the weather 24 hours later. But I would like to make a distinction between what happens here and maybe what happens in Kalyanpur or what happens in Rawatpur or Bada Chauhaya or in Lucknow or maybe what happens in Sydney. So therefore the resolution becomes very important, and I can run those big resolutions only if I have enormous amount or sufficient amount of computing power. The problem with having too much computing power are also kind of interesting. A, the bigger your computers, the more is the electricity you need to run these computers. And when these computers run, they generate enormous amount of heat. So now you need to cool it down. So it is very interesting. You first run a computer by putting in electricity and it heats up. Then you put in more electricity to actually cool it down. Okay. So it is kind of interesting, you are doing twice the operation of spending electricity. Then when you compute at such a fast rate, you will generate enormous amount of data. So you need to store that data, and therefore along with all the computing power, you will need lot of storage capacity. Okay. So just like you have petaflops in the number of processors, you would now need many disks, many arrays, and now you need to organize the data because this data is also distributed, and then you have to retrieve it and analyze that data. So, that also becomes a problem. Space will become a problem. Okay. Then your emissions become a problem, because if you are going to spend so much energy and you are not doing it in a framework of green operations which are environmental friendly, it could come back and haunt you. These days it is a big area of how to pack computers and how to cool them down and how to run a data center efficiently. So, it is not just setting up a small computer and doing your CFD. So, if you want to do HPC, which is called high performance computing, you are really looking at computing which is state of the art, which is really at a scale which requires something like a center to set it up.